All right, so this is another lecture. This week I'm going to be talking about diversity and inclusion, and then there'll be another very short video after this, specifically with verbal instructions for doing the weekly online assignment. All right, so I really want to talk about diversity and inclusion. I think that it's a really good place to kind of start out our work. Last week kind of really was more of an introduction, talking about supervision, talking about the type of leader that you are. Now we're going to dive into some of the work of kind of writing policies and procedures to support you as a leader and as a supervisor of other people within early childhood education programs. I think it's important that we value, that we respect, and that we center diversity and inclusion in our programs. Specifically for me, before I kind of transitioned into teaching at community college and universities, I was, for 5 years, I worked for Regional Center, which provides education, support, and coaching for families with children with special needs. So I was in the 0 to 3 department. So I would go into people's homes and I would coach and support and parents who have children 0 to 3, so infants and toddlers with special needs. So we're talking Down syndrome, maybe possibly we'll end up on the autism spectrum, cerebral palsy, spina bifida. It was fantastic. I loved it. I actually was working at a community college trying to keep this ball rolling for over a year. It was really a hard job to leave because I 100% and need so much that our programs center and value and support children with special needs. I think it should be the keystone of a program, and I think diversity as well, because we are becoming more diverse. I think we're really lucky in Southern California. We're on a border region. We have a wonderful, diverse population that we serve. Not only people from south of the border, but we're talking people from China, from Korea, from Afghanistan, Somalia, all different types of wonderful cultures that we get to be exposed to. So we're more diverse racially, linguistically, culturally, but sometimes that also means that we need to make accommodations and adaptations for children with special needs and for some of our populations that are maybe speaking different languages or doing things differently culturally. So we need to adapt and to change to meet the needs of our communities and how our communities are becoming more diverse. So I start this off as a way that this should be part of your program. So later on, we're going to write a mission statement, and we're also going to write a diversity mission statement. What are your beliefs about diversity? So that if a parent was flipping through your book, they would see what you think about children with special needs, how you are going to provide care for them in the classroom. And then also for racially and culturally and linguistically diverse families as well, how are you going to support them as well? So I'm going to talk specifically about children with special needs. It's a passion of mine. I speak at conferences about this, and this is something that we do. We write policies together. The best thing I think about being in the state of California is that we have this, we have all of these resources that the state has given to us. With that comes licensing and requirements and regulations and things like that that maybe are sometimes not so fun. Community care licensing can sometimes be a bugaboo. Sometimes we don't necessarily want to deal with our analysts, but I think they allow us to stay quality all the time. But to support all of those regulations, we also have great resources. So if you go to the state website or the community care website, you're going to get resources on how to provide a quality educational experience for children. Part of it as well is this California Early Childhood Educator Competencies. This is all up on YouTube. I am sure that you have seen one of these in a staff meeting or a conference or something like that. I'm speaking to you now as a supervisor. So from this point forward, you are supervising adults in some capacity, or that is your future goal. This is a great resource for you in how to talk about special needs and inclusion. I think this is a great introduction to it, and it specifically talks about early childhood, infants, toddlers, preschoolers, areas where we have sometimes been lacking in how we provide inclusionary experiences for children. We have to, the federal law says that children with special needs are entitled to free and appropriate public education. So you can go to a school district and you can get the services that you need with an IEP if you're over the age of 3. Under the age of 3, you get an IFSP or an individualized family service plan. they're a little bit different. I would, if you want to know more about this and like the legal liability aspects, go to mychildwithoutlimits.org, and they have a federal laws that help those special needs. I did this for 5 years. I don't understand all of the legalities of the law, state, federal, county, how it all kind of works together. Sometimes in childcare, because we are not always considered public education, we think that we don't have to do this. Legally, maybe not. Should we? Yes, I believe that it is a moral imperative. When I have talked with families who have wanted to put their child with cerebral palsy or Down syndrome into an infant or toddler program or preschool as well, they'll call up and they'll be like, hi, my son's 2, he has Down syndrome. Do you have space in your center? And they'll be like, no. I've called that exact same center afterwards and said, hi, I have a 2-year-old. Do you have space? And they say yes. So that center had the space, but they heard Down syndrome and they said they didn't. I have heard that over and over from families. I actually told my families, don't say that there's a special need. Go on the tour and then have them tell you face to face that they're not going to have a spot for your child. I think it's deeply, deeply important. And I know that the people who did that, it was fear. They were thinking, I can't, like, not that they don't like this child with Down syndrome or with an intellectual disability or has a wheelchair or something like that. They're just thinking, I can't do it. My classroom's too small. I haven't been trained. I don't have the education. You will be able to do it, I promise. We have systems, we have regional center, we have the position I have. I went to preschools all the time and I showed teachers, oh, move this, put this over. The doorway is totally wide enough for him and his crutches to get through. All right, we're gonna change this. And then I supported the teachers. Like I didn't just whirlwind in, change the entire classroom and then go back out. I came a lot and I worked with the families and I supported them. They went to the support groups with the parents. The parents came in and told them, oh, my child with Down syndrome, she is 1 year old. She needs to wear these special pants every once in a while to kind of work on her core development, blah, 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 blah. We will support you. There are systems so that you can include children with special needs. I promise you, it is around. Don't say that you can't take a child because of fear, because of lack of education. You can get that, and your program is going to be better when you take children with special needs. In addition to accepting children with special needs into your program, we also have inclusion of employees as well. So if you hire an employee, you cannot discriminate them, and there needs to be public accommodations as well. So like with transportation or getting to the bathroom, things like that as well. We cannot discriminate in employment. And that's a very big part of this is the employment aspect. So, you will need to work with a lawyer or something like that if you are having questions about disability or workman's comp or things like that. But the basis is very similar to working with children with special needs. You can have employees with disabilities within your program. I've worked with blind, I've worked with deaf employees, I've worked with employees with processing, auditory processing disorders, mental health issues, and things like that have added greatly to my program and required typically very, very little in the form of accommodation. Sometimes, like with a deaf employee, just making sure that we're face-to-face, that I'm not yelling across the classroom when she can't see me, she can't hear me, she can't read my lips, she doesn't know that I'm talking to her. Going over, tapping her on the shoulder, and then talking to her, that was basically the form of accommodation that we needed to. Sometimes in staff meetings, she would bring a translator or I would find a translator for her if I thought or she thought that it was going to be a very theory heavy or very much a lot of information, or I would just make sure that the things that I were talking about were written out so that she could see it. It was a process that we engaged in as a supervisor and as an employee, and it worked really well. When we had open communication, I would say, we're having a staff meeting on this topic. How do you want me to support you in learning this information? And she would tell me. And I would make sure that she had those accommodations, which were super, super simple. I do the same for my families that speak Spanish. Every single thing that is written out in our classrooms is then translated into Spanish. In other places, it was Korean or Vietnamese, something like that. And this day and age, I mean, Google can basically do. I mean, Google Translate is a little iffy sometimes, but there are other translation services online that are much, much better than Google's, but it's fairly easy to access them. Okay, so how would I do special needs services in an ECE program? So these are just some examples of how I could work with it. So a 4-year-old is receiving 30 minutes of speech therapy in a group and at public school site, and also attends a part-day preschool at another location. So his parents have it totally covered. Goes to school in the morning, and then once in the afternoon a week, he goes and he works on articulation because he can't say his S's, his T's, and his R's, something like that. You can understand him. It's very easy to accommodate him in the classroom. He works with his peers really well, and in addition to that, he's hearing his peers speak. He's talking with other people, supporting his language development. An infant with Down syndrome is going to receive in-home early intervention, physical therapy, and occupational therapy, working on those fine motor skills, feeding themselves, things like that. The child will also attend 30 hours of care at an ECE program, and this can happen in a variety of ways. Maybe the parent will meet the physical therapist at the child care center once a month. And the physical therapist, the mom, and the teacher will all work together in ways that they can support the infant in rolling over. Maybe early intervention will happen in the center. Maybe early intervention will happen at home afterwards. Maybe mom will bring the information from the early interventionist and provide it to the teachers so that this whole team of professionals is supporting this little one who has Down syndrome. Then a 3-year-old with global developmental delays, so in all areas of development, they are delayed. They will be transitioned from FCC, so in-home care with therapies provided at home with the parents, into a part-day preschool at a school district. So 0 to 3, the child who has developmental delays was in an in-home daycare. Therapies were either with the parents or at the in-home daycare. They're transitioning now that they're 3 into a part-day preschool at a school district. So the school district is now providing the therapeutic services, and the SCC provider provides before and after care because these parents work. So they drop the child off, they pick them up, a combination of both. So that's an example of how we provide. And it's easy, like I said, don't not have a child with special needs in your program because you feel scared or you haven't been trained or you want to know more. You will know more because you will be working, hopefully, best case scenario, with a team of professionals. I also think we need to have this kind of theory of universal design for living. So it is, and this is, I love this because it applies to adult supervision in addition to it applying to children with special needs and just diversity in general. So if you acknowledge that there is a diversity of learners, so people learn in diverse ways, and that you're going to accommodate all the needs of those learners from the beginning in your curriculum, you're not looking backwards. You're starting it from a place of inclusion. You're starting it from a place of diversity from the very first building block of curriculum design, curriculum planning, and lesson planning as well. So if you know that you have somebody who's learning English, how do you support that at the beginning? If you know that you have somebody who has crutches or a wheelchair or needs to move a lot or uses sign language, if you accommodate that in your curriculum, in your lesson planning, then it's less that you have to do it in the moment because you've already planned for it. You already know, how am I going to support this child who's learning Spanish or learning English? In our circle times, we've done that. We've already thought about that in the planning process. I have a little chapter about universal design for learning in this week. It's up on Canvas. It's just a little PDF. It's an extra resource if you wanted to know more about how you respect and work with the ways that everybody learns from the very beginning. So diversity in ECE programs. So we know, and I talked about this already, that we are increasingly diverse. So we know that there's a huge growth in the demographic. So this is from 2017 from Child Care Aware, which looks at child development trends within the entire nation. Children of refugee and immigrants now account for 25% of the 23 million children under the age of 6, compared to just 14% in 1990. States like California, Texas, New York, Florida, and Illinois account for half of the number of children in immigrant families. Research has shown that these young children, especially dual language learners, benefit from childcare. So there is a huge need for childcare. Infants and toddlers specifically we need to support working families. Most people, specifically in Southern California, are dual working families. I am a dual working family. So we know that 25% of our students in K through 12 are English language learners, and that we are linguistically and culturally and racially diverse. I think it's one of the strengths of working in Southern California. We also need to know that childcare has to be responsive to these children and these families. Once again, love YouTube, love all the videos that we have and that we can show adults. So if you were going to be doing your staff meeting and you're going to be talking about cultural and linguistic diversity, this is a fantastic video called Supporting Cultural and Linguistic Diversity in Early Childhood. It's totally open on YouTube. You can go ahead and take a look at it. I think it was a great way to work with adults and teach adults how to work with different types of diverse families and children. So English as second language learners in some populations is 25%. I would say I live in San Diego, with San Diego County, which is more diverse. I would say I think my daughter's elementary school is, I can't remember the last number. I think it was like 72% English as second language learners. We are very close to the border, and it's fantastic. My daughters this past Christmas learned Jingle Bells in English and Jingle Bells in Spanish. And most of us employ bilingual staff. My husband speaks Spanish and English. I don't. I struggled. I went to college, and I took so many Spanish classes, and I understand a little bit, but I'm pretty bad. And I really wish that my brain would allow me to take in another language. I needed to have done it very, very young in order to have those neural connections to allow me to really be bilingual, or I just need to be in a place that speaks another language 24/7 in order to change. So at this point, me being bilingual is probably not going to happen, which is a great regret of mine. So how can we do accommodations? So don't assume that parents have English proficiency, and don't assume their language by the nation of their origin. So don't assume that somebody from Mexico speaks Spanish. They might speak another dialect or indigenous language as their first language. And don't assume English proficiency as well. State, county, and federal programs sometimes can provide a translator on a temporary or one-time basis. We had a family from Burma. And so at the very beginning, we had a Burmese translator in order to make sure that our policies, procedures, everything within the employee handbook was really, really spelled out, and they understand in the language of their birth, in the language that they understand most in. And so that was really fantastic that in this case, the county was able to provide that. Sometimes it doesn't happen all the time. I think that it should. It's better, but we might need to look into other ways that you can provide this as well. And sometimes it can't always be written. Sometimes you can get a translation services, but if the parent can't read, and I found this out with a family where the parents were functionally illiterate, but their policies, procedures, or handbooks was more than they were going to be able to learn in that method. We needed to do it verbally, and had been translated, but the amount that they were going to take in, even in a translated setting, was going to be less. So we needed to evaluate other ways that we could have these parents learn that type of information. And in that case, it was seeking out help from a family's community. So there was like a younger cousin, niece, who spoke this very specific language. I sometimes hesitate in finding people from families, especially if they're younger. It changes dynamics and family relationships, but sometimes we need to do what we need to do. And so this girl was in college. She spoke both languages flawlessly. And so we were able to set up times with her where we could have really good communication between the family, this young translator, and then us as a management team. Other types of diversity, diversity of family structure, so grandparents as guardians or caregivers, kinship care, things like that. LGBTQ and the spectrum that we have within that as well, and then foster adoption as well. So once again, not making assumptions about this is a two-person family, it's heteronormative, you know, things like that. Just having a family come in and not making assumptions about it. We also have religious diversity. Typically what plays out in early childhood education is like Seventh-day Adventists or Jehovah's Witnesses, people who don't celebrate Halloween, birthdays, things like that. having a note within the file, taking care of it in a management way, and then within the daily practice, most programs don't have religious diversity unless they're kind of like within a church or something like that. So we're not talking a lot about religion, and we don't do a lot of holidays to begin with, and that's to kind of make sure that even if they're not people that don't celebrate these out like that, you know, not talking about Christmas with a Jewish family, you know, things like that. And then cultural and ethnic identity as well. So really what we are wanting to do with valuing and not making assumptions about the families that come into our care is to eliminate tensions between the family and the program, because we're sensitive and responsive. We haven't assumed something and then the parent has to correct us and then maybe feels embarrassed or like, why did you assume this about me? You know, things like that. We want to be sensitive, responsible, professional, and respectful to the families that enter with us as well. And then as adults, working with adults, we don't want to assume this about our employees, especially when we're getting to know them. We're not going to assume that they don't have kids or they do have kids or what their family structure is. We're going to learn that about them, but we don't want to assume something about them that isn't true. It's really hard. That's a hard place to come off of, is an assumption that then has to be corrected or challenged by your new volunteer or your new employee or things like that. It's not the best foot to start off on. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have a great relationship with them, but it's better to start off from a sensitive and responsive place. All right, so I talked about universal design for learning, and this is the 7 principles that I was kind of talking about. There is an additional reading if you wanted to on Canvas for this week. So if you wanted to download and read it, but they talk about being equitable. So people have equity. It's not the same necessarily, but to get people to where they need to be, you offer the accommodations that they need. It's flexible, it's simple to use, it's clearly communicated. Mistakes are tolerated or even encouraged. I think that's a great thing about the new generations. My daughter's elementary school, they're big into learning from mistakes, learning as a process instead of, I really feel like when I was growing up, oh, you made a mistake, you fail, you know, things like that. So we're learning to learn. Low physical effort, easy to use regardless of mobility or physical health. And this is from 2 theorists called Hunt and Marshall. Once again, this is the universal design for learning. You can either Google it or I have kind of an introductory text once again up on Canvas this week if you wanted to take a look. So in conclusion, you are a supervisor, you are a leader, you are working with other adults, children, and families. You need to be the model. You need to be the paradigm. You're starting the process of inclusion and respect for diversity, which is going to make the quality of care that you provide better. When we embrace our diverse populations, our program and our community is strengthened as a whole. All right, so this is the first of 2 videos. The second one is a little bit shorter and it's just talking about the online assignment that you'll be doing this week. Thanks so much.